Cassidy was 52, a corporal in all but paperwork, and the men called him Pop because his hair had gone white before the war ended. In December 1944, the Ardennes did not care what a man had been. It cared how fast he moved and how long he could keep his hands working when the cold tried to turn every joint into glass. He knelt in a ditch beside a broken road leading towards Saint-Vith, where retreating trucks had chewed the snow into ruts and then frozen in place. A wrecked half-track blocked the bend. A kitchen truck burned down to its axles, and the smell of old grease still hung under the wind. Cassidy had been pulled from the line because he could write clearly and because before Pennsylvania limestone dust became memory, he had been a stonemason who knew how to make names last. Now the army wanted names to survive the winter, even when bodies did not. He shoveled snow and dirt over a dead rifleman, then reached into the man's coat for tags. The dog tag was there, cold metal against cold skin. A field card was there too, pencil smudged by moisture, name, serial number, unit, date, a space for effects. Cassidy started to fold the card back into the pocket, and his fingers caught a seam that did not belong. Someone had stitched an inner pocket into the lining, tight and careful, the way a man stitched something he could not afford to lose. Cassidy worried the thread with his thumbnail until it gave. He pulled out a waterproof pouch the size of his palm. It was heavier than it should have been, and the weight felt like paper pressed flat, protected from weather and from search. He should have handed it up the chain, because anything unusual became intelligence the moment a lieutenant touched it. Instead, he slipped it into the prayer book he carried in his inner pocket, his wife's small Catholic booklet with her name written on the first page, and buttoned the coat over it. The result was that the pouch stayed with him. The cost was that he had made himself responsible for whatever it contained, whether it proved something true or destroyed him by looking true. A sentry at a makeshift checkpoint shouted for the day's password. MPS were stopping their own men because in the Ardennes, fear traveled faster than trucks. Rumors said Germans were driving captured jeeps, wearing American overcoats, asking questions with perfect English, turning road signs, and slipping through gaps while honest men froze in line. Cassidy had not seen it, but he had watched fear turn discipline into suspicion and suspicion into bullets. He answered the password, passed the barrier, and watched an MP frisk a driver whose only crime was shaking too much. The result was that Cassidy understood how thin his protection was. One wrong answer, one unfamiliar phrase, and his own side could decide he was the enemy. The cost was that he kept the pouch silent and the prayer book hidden, because a truth that could not be explained quickly was the most dangerous kind. He kept walking until the trees thickened. Wind cut through the branches and carried a woman's voice. She stood at the edge of a marked minefield where stakes leaned and snow lay uneven over blast craters. She wore a nurse's coat, grey with slush, and knelt beside a wounded German soldier whose lips had already turned blue. She tipped a canteen to his mouth and waited as if patience could outvote blood loss. Cassidy's first impulse was to pull her back. His second was to keep her alive long enough to be questioned. He advanced in short, placed steps, following the line of disturbed snow she had made, and took her elbow. "Stay on my footprints," he told her. His voice was rough from cold. It was not kindness. It was procedure. The result was that she rose without panic and followed exactly, matching his pace as if she had practiced being led through danger. The cost was that his men behind him began to shout, calling her a trap, calling him an old fool who would get them killed. He used his age like authority. He raised his free hand, palm out, and forced them to hold their fire. The action prevented a panicked shot. The result was that the woman remained alive and untested. The cost was that Cassidy became the man to blame if she proved false. She did not flinch at the shouting. When they reached firmer ground, Cassidy asked her name. She produced an identification tag on a cord. Margaret, stamped cleanly, scuffed in all the right places. The tag looked too correct, as if someone had studied how where should appear and then manufactured it. "I'm medical," she said. She answered his next questions. Training, bandages, evacuation routes. Quickly and precisely, with the smoothness of a recited manual. Cassidy listened for the stumble of a real memory, and heard none. He noticed her hands were red from cold, but not cracked, as if they had been kept out of winter until recently. The result was that suspicion formed without proof. The cost was that suspicion did not change his decision. He still could not leave a woman to die in this snow. They moved off the road into the trees. A burned jeep sat half-buried, ration tins scattered like coins. Cassidy noticed a cigarette butt pressed into the snow that the wind had not yet covered, and a boot print beside it deeper than the others, hobnailed. Someone had been close recently, and not moving like a lost man. He said nothing. If he fed fear, it would eat his men before the Germans did. As afternoon died early, Margaret spoke in small, calm doses, never long enough to sound like a lecture. She talked about war making everyone dirty, about the lie of clean hands. She did not accuse. She offered relief. If no one was innocent, then no one had to keep trying. Cassidy felt the hook seek his fatigue, the tiredness he had carried since Normandy. He let her words pass without giving them a place to land. They reached a village of low stone and timber houses, roofs bowed under snow, windows blown out. Smoke drifted from one chimney, thin and deliberate, too straight to be a survivor's accident. Margaret angled toward it, as if she knew what waited there. Cassidy followed, because purpose in a dead village was either rescue or bait, and he needed to know which. Bodies lay at thresholds and beside woodpiles, civilians by their shoes and coats. Their hands were bare, their pockets turned out, their faces fixed in the calm of people who died without understanding why. Someone had staged them to be seen. Margaret made herself small and sorrowful, a woman in a nurse's coat among the dead. Then she pointed. A crushed pack of American cigarettes lay in the slush. Brass casings glittered where the snow had been brushed aside. A strip of cloth with 106 stenciled on it clung to a fence nail. Cassidy knew the number. Men had been talking about the 106th since the offensive opened, about units caught on the Schnee Eifel, about surrender and breakout attempts, and the shame that follows any story of capture. In a retreat like this, crimes could happen. The scene asked him to believe the worst about his own side, and it offered just enough realism to make belief feel responsible. He knelt by the cigarette pack. The cardboard was stiff, the ink barely smeared. The snow around it had an older crust. The pack looked newer than the weather that held it. He moved to the casings and saw them lying too neatly, like evidence arranged for a photograph. He walked the yard and studied footprints. Civilian tracks wandered and doubled back. Boot prints formed lines that cut off doors, purposeful and parallel, the way a squad moved when it was practicing. He checked one more detail because he could not afford to be wrong. He rubbed a casing between his glove and thumb. It left a bright smear on the leather, fresh oxidation that wind and time should have dulled. The action confirmed what his eye suspected. The result was certainty. This was choreography, not aftermath. The cost was that certainty did not resurrect anyone, and it put him at odds with the woman who had led him here. Margaret spoke softly, as if offering mercy. "Pop," she said, using the nickname no stranger should know. "This is what the war is. No justice. Just the strong writing the story." Cassidy did not answer her argument. He picked up a child's mitten from beneath a table and set it on top, straightening it as if order mattered. He made his men look at it, not to accuse them, but to remind them that bodies were not props, even when someone tried to use them that way. The action changed nothing on the ground. The result was only that his hands chose respect over despair. The cost was that he spent time he did not have, and he felt the village closing around his route like a fist. He forced his men back into the trees before dusk sealed the village. As they left, he heard an engine far off, then the quick click of metal not made by wind. He saw no enemy, only the suggestion of movement beyond the fur line. He understood that the village had been a trap for his mind and for his map. The prayer book pressed against his ribs. Inside it, the waterproof pouch waited like a second pulse. Cassidy realized he was no longer only retreating from Germans, he was retreating from a story someone wanted to put in his mouth. Night turned the forest into a single shape. Cassidy moved by feel, following a frozen creek bed where the banks hid them from the road. His men were fewer. 2 had peeled away to find the main line and never returned. Each absence narrowed his options and made the cold feel personal, as if winter itself were taking attendance. Under a tangle of branches, he finally opened the pouch. He pulled off one glove, and pain bit his skin immediately. The seal gave with a soft crack. Inside were folded sheets, typed German headers, then English paragraphs beneath in clean, practiced first-person sentences. There were call signs, shortwave frequencies, and a simple schedule written in pencil: time blocks, window, repeat. One page had a block stamp across it: Echo. Cassidy did not need to read German to understand the structure. These were scripts for an American voice, confessions designed to sound reluctant, admissions of shooting civilians, lines about orders from officers, lines meant to poison trust in the ranks. The plan was not to defeat his unit with bullets. It was to defeat it with a recording that would travel farther than artillery. He folded the pages back, kept them dry, and slid them into the prayer book behind his wife's inked name. The result was that he now carried proof of a machine. The cost was that the machine would try to claim him as its product the moment it found him. Margaret watched him without asking what he had found. She did not need to. She spoke about exhaustion, about the way systems used men and then blamed them, about how a retreat always required a scapegoat. She hinted at agreements made in warm rooms, at sacrifice decided by people who would never freeze. She never named a general or a date. Naming would have made it testable. She kept it as a feeling that could not be disproved, and therefore could not be defended against. Cassidy answered with one reality he could touch. He spoke of a convoy stalled by wrecks, of blankets lost in the jam, of a medic who ran out of morphine, of a lieutenant who changed the route because the radio went dead. War was chaos, and chaos created tragedies without conspiracies. The result was that her story did not settle easily into him. The cost was that he could not fully dismiss it either, because chaos looked like intention when you were the one left behind in the snow. As morning came grey and thin, Margaret kept pace without stumbling. She knew where to step, where the snow hid ice, where the creek bank would collapse. That knowledge was not luck. Cassidy watched her boots. They were too well kept for someone who had been lost for days. Her words sharpened. "You're tired of being good," she said once softly, when his breathing turned harsh. "Goodness doesn't save anyone." The sentence was aimed at the place he kept his wife's book, the place where belief lived like a stubborn ember. Cassidy felt anger, not at her, but at how close the sentence came to the truth that tempted him on the worst nights. By midday, the cold began to win. Cassidy's feet lost sensation. His fingers turned clumsy. He knew the signs from men he had watched sit down and never get up, their bodies choosing rest because the mind could no longer pay the price of staying awake. He had one blanket left, grey wool that smelled of smoke and sweat. He kept it because men without blankets became bodies without names. Margaret leaned against a tree. For the first time, her hands trembled. Cassidy saw in that tremor not weakness but the edge of control slipping. He pulled the blanket from his pack and wrapped it around her shoulders. The action was simple. The result was immediate. She stiffened as if struck, eyes narrowing in confusion. The cost was immediate too. Cassidy felt the cold bite deeper into him, and he knew he had traded minutes of his own survival for a decision he would not justify with tactics. He gave her one sentence anyway, because he needed to anchor himself. "If the world is as rotten as you say," he told her, "then we do one decent thing anyway, or this snow never melts." He did not argue that decency would fix the war. He argued that choice still mattered. The result was that his mind steadied around a point, even as his body weakened. The cost was that he had shown her the one weapon she could not counterfeit. a man who would spend himself to keep his own rule intact. Her face flickered, anger, then something less nameable. Confusion was a crack. In a person trained as a tool, cracks were dangerous because they made the tool hesitate. They did not have time to linger in it. A metal click sounded beyond the trees. A muffled command followed. Cassidy dropped behind a fallen log and spread his last men into cover. He raised his rifle, but his hands shook and his sight wavered. The action of preparing to fight produced a blunt result. He would lose a straight exchange. The cost was that he had to think about survival as concealment, not courage. Lights flickered between trunks. Shapes moved with discipline. A voice called in German. Another answered, short syllables, clipped like a code. The searching shapes paused, then advanced with certainty. Margaret rose before Cassidy could stop her. She lifted her hands and spoke the code. The woods responded. Men in white smocks stepped out, rifles leveled, faces young and hard. Their boots carried hobnails, their movements carried rehearsal. They flowed around Cassidy's position the way water found gaps. Capture came like a debt finally collected. A soldier yanked Cassidy's coat open, searched for weapons, took his knife and extra magazine. His glove brushed the prayer book and moved on. To the soldier, it was just a book. Cassidy turned his body slightly and kept his breathing even. The result was that the proof stayed hidden. The cost was that he now walked on borrowed seconds under men who would kill him if he said the wrong word. They marched him to a hollow where tarps had been stretched between trees. Under the tarps sat a camera on a tripod, a harsh lamp fed by a sputtering generator, and a compact shortwave radio with an antenna angled into black branches. Beside the camera lay a stack of typed pages weighted by a bayonet. This was not a battlefield. It was a workshop built to manufacture one clean piece of evidence. A man with smooth hands and a clipboard stepped forward. He spoke English with trained correctness and no emotion. "You will speak," he said, as if reading a medical instruction. Cassidy said nothing. The man gestured, and soldiers shoved Cassidy onto a crate in front of the lens. Another soldier wiped snow and blood from Cassidy's cheek, turned his collar and tried to square his shoulders for the camera. The action staged him as a usable witness. The result was that even his posture became part of the script. The cost was that Cassidy felt his own body being converted into a prop. The lamp flared, turning Cassidy's breath into a white cloud. The clipboard man read from the page, line by line, offering Cassidy the chance to repeat. The lines matched the scripts in the pouch. This was echo made physical. Cassidy kept his mouth shut. Silence had its own cost here. It could be edited into guilt or answered with pain. The clipboard man's patience thinned. He dragged one of Cassidy's men forward, bruised, terrified, and made him kneel where Cassidy could see him. Then the man turned to Margaret and handed her a pistol. Cassidy understood the procedure. A confession needed proof of voluntariness. The easiest proof was a punishment delivered by the person who had pretended to protect him. The result was that Margaret became the final mechanism. The cost was that Cassidy's earlier mercy had placed her within arm's reach of his death. The man spoke a short command in German. Margaret faced Cassidy with the pistol. Her expression was carved calm, but her eyes flicked to Cassidy's chest, to the prayer book bulge beneath his coat, as if she could feel the weight she had not managed to steal. Cassidy reached inside his coat and pulled the prayer book out just enough that the lamp caught the inside cover. His wife's name sat there in dark ink, stubborn and ordinary, proof that he belonged to someone outside this hollow. The pouch and the tag thickened the pages behind it. Margaret saw the ink. She saw the name. She saw, in a way training could not erase, that someone had written him into a life, and that he had carried that writing through Normandy and into this winter. Her arm lifted, the pistol aimed. Cassidy did not beg. He kept his eyes on hers and held still, refusing to give the camera the satisfaction of panic. Margaret did not shoot Cassidy. She turned and fired at the clipboard man instead. The shot cracked under the tarps. The man fell into the crates, surprised more than dramatic. For a heartbeat, the hollow froze, because the procedure had broken and no one knew which rule replaced it. Cassidy spent the heartbeat on motion. He lunged for the nearest soldier's rifle and shoved the barrel up. The soldier stumbled and swung back. Another man aimed at Margaret. She fired again and missed. The miss cost her. Discipline recovered faster than shock. The generator coughed. The lamp flickered. The camera tilted as someone hit the tripod. Margaret dove for the radio set. Her hands moved with the same precision that had made her terrifying earlier. But now the precision served a different end. She ripped a headset free, spun a dial, and spoke into the microphone in clipped German. Cassidy caught numbers and grid references, coordinates. She was calling fire onto the hollow. The action of her transmission produced a result beyond the tarps. It summoned the war's heavy hand. The cost was that she had made herself an enemy to everyone still standing. A soldier tackled her. Cassidy struck the soldier with the rifle butt and felt pain flare up his old wrists. Margaret crawled back to the microphone, blood soaking her sleeve where a round had grazed her. She spoke again, louder, finishing the last sequence of numbers as if she were carving them into the air. Outside, the snow thinned for a moment. A seam opened in the clouds like torn cloth. Through it came the roar of American engines, heavy and certain. P-47. Thunderbolts dropped low through the gap, grey wings flashing, guns stitching the snow and rockets screaming into the trees. Cassidy grabbed Margaret and shoved her behind a crate. He flattened over her as the first explosions heaved the ground. Tarps snapped, crates flipped, the lamp died. The camera went over, crushed. The hollow became smoke, splinters and white earth thrown into the air. When the engines faded, silence returned with the weight of aftermath. Cassidy pushed himself up, ears ringing, mouth full of grit. German soldiers lay scattered in the snow, some moving, some not. The workshop was broken into parts that could not be reassembled. The result was that Echo's machinery had been physically destroyed. The cost was that destruction had not cared who deserved it. Margaret lay on her side, face grey, breathing shallow. Cassidy reached for his canteen. Her hand caught his wrist with a sudden strength. "No," she whispered. It was not pride. It was calculation aimed at his survival. "They will say you staged this," she rasped. "They will say you were turned." Cassidy understood. In this sector, Americans were already stopping Americans, asking passwords, hunting infiltrators, and passing along stories about prisoners shot in the snow as warnings. Counterintelligence Corps teams moved behind the lines, looking for the wrong accent, the wrong hometown answer, the wrong memory. If Cassidy was found with a dead German woman and a destroyed radio site, someone could make him the story that replaced the story he had prevented. Margaret fumbled inside her coat and tore out the identification tag that read Margaret. She smashed it against a crate until it bent and snapped. Then she pulled a second tag from a hidden pocket, smaller and dirtier, stamped with another name. Ilse von Braun. She pressed it into Cassidy's palm as if pressing a nail into wood. "The papers," she said. Cassidy slid the tag into the prayer book behind the waterproof pouch and tucked the book back into his coat. The action secured the chain of custody. The result was that he now held two proofs that could support each other. The cost was that he had to walk them into an American system that might prefer clean stories to true ones. Boots crunched in the snow. Voices called in English. Cassidy stood with his hands visible and his rifle lowered. An overcoat figure approached, weapon ready but not pointed. The man's posture carried authority without drama. "Name, unit, birthplace," the man said, quick, like a checklist. Cassidy answered, "Pennsylvania." The man watched his mouth as if listening for a lie, and then nodded once. "Counterintelligence," he said. He looked at Cassidy's bulging inner pocket. "What are you carrying?" Cassidy drew out the prayer book slowly and offered it. The action ended his control over the evidence. The result was that the truth entered a channel that could preserve it. The cost was that the same channel could bury it, and bury him with it. The intelligence sergeant opened the book, saw the pouch, saw the tag, and paused on the inside cover where Cassidy's wife's name was written. He looked back at Cassidy as if weighing the kind of man who carried a name through a retreat. "You understand what this does to you if it's wrong," he said. Cassidy nodded. He did not argue. He had been watching lies kill men since June. He was done bargaining with them. Margaret's eyes were half closed now. Cassidy crouched near her without touching, close enough to be present. He wanted to ask why she had turned. The answer would have been longer than her breath, and he did not want to give the camera in his head anything it could twist. The sergeant held the prayer book under his arm like a file. "Do you want this written?" he asked Cassidy. "Or do you want it to disappear so you can walk away clean?" Cassidy thought of the staged village, the neat casings, the script written in his language. He thought of the mitten he had set on the table, a small gesture that had cost time and bought nothing except the ability to live with himself. He thought of his wife's ink and the way ink could outlast snow if someone chose to protect it. "Write it," he said. 2 words. The action was minimal. The result was that the record began. The cost was that Cassidy's life after this would include questions, suspicion, and the slow punishment of being a witness in a war that preferred simple heroes. The sergeant turned away to speak into his handset, already converting the hollow into coordinates, the equipment into recovered items, the confession that never happened into a file number. Cassidy stood in the snow beside a dead woman and a living book, and understood with a tired clarity that the winter could bury anything except a name carved deep enough to resist it.